Headlights off. A white pickup rolls onto Gable Bridge. The driver jumps out. Camel jacket, knit cap. He lifts a blue cooler to the rail and shoves. The splash is heavy. Wrong for an empty box. I yell, "Hey!" The truck peels away. Silence, then a sound I will never forget. A cry from the cooler. I slide down the bank. Frost bites my palms. The cooler is trapped in roots. I haul. It fights. Zip ties. 2 of them. I saw with a house key. Plastic pops. The lid sticks. I force it open. Everything stops. A newborn. Blue lips. Wet breath. A paper bracelet cut. A brass locket on her cheek. Be brave. Mom. I know that locket. I gave the same one to my daughter, Abby, on her 18th birthday. My hands move before my brain. I clear the baby's face. I wrap him in my coat. Warren County 911, what's your emergency? I found a baby at Gable Bridge. He's cold. He's barely... Stay with me. Warm him. Help is on the way. Your name? Joan Parker. Sirens close in, paramedics run, heat lamps, oxygen. A nurse grips my wrist. She's tiny, but he's fighting. Then a detective steps in. Short hair, leather notebook, a posture that said she'd stood between people and their worst day before. Miss Parker, I'm Detective Lainey Ortiz. I stood because my mother told me to stand when officers enter a room. I can tell you exactly what I saw. She let me tell it twice without interrupting. White pickup, Hallie tree and stump decal, camo jacket, knit cap, strong, hurried. I told her the cooler, the cry, the zip ties, the locket. When I said Abby's name, my voice did something I didn't plan. Is there a reason the locket felt familiar? Lainey asked, pen quiet, head tilted. My daughter, Abby Parker. She disappeared 10 months ago. We had a fight. She packed a backpack and she left. We thought she'd cool down and come back. Kids do that sometimes when they're mad. I winced at the word kids. Abby was 22, old enough to vote and too young to know she only fought like that with people she trusted to still be there in the morning. She wore a locket with that inscription, a gift. She told me once she fell asleep holding it. I took a breath and met the detective's gaze. If that baby turned out to be family, I will need your DNA for a kinship panel. I'm sorry to ask. I'm more sorry that I have to. Test anything you want. She nodded at my willingness like it cost me something she understood. Do you remember anything else about the truck? The plate was muddy. He didn't shut the door when he got out. He moved like he wanted to be strong and done. Cheryl came back with a sterile bag and a gentle voice. We logged the locket, the shirt, and the bracelet fragment. NICU is taking him now. He's hypothermic and likely aspirated water. We'll keep you updated as often as we can. They'll find the man, I told the baby in my head, as if he could hear me through the walls. I slept in a plastic chair outside NICU that night, if sleep can be when your brain keeps throwing you back on a riverbank. The hum of machines unspooled into something like prayer. 2 days later, Lainey found me by the vending machines again, this time with a lab tech who had ink on his fingers and a nervous cough. We ran the quick panel. My mouth went dry to make paper jealous. He's not your son, she said, humor showing itself in gallows places. But he is your grandson, approximately 25% shared DNA. Cheryl's hand returned to my wrist like it had always been there. The floor threatened to tilt. Relief and grief tugged opposite corners of the same cloth until my knees remembered what holding meant. Where is Abby? I asked. Please, where is my girl? We're opening every file with her name on it. You gave me a gift with that truck decal. Hallie Tree and Stump is local, and if we find the driver, we'll find everyone who thought this was a solution. The social worker arrived with a folder thick enough to doorstop a gale. "Mila Chang," she said, and her cardigan looked like it had been folded along the same crease 100 times. "We'll be making sure he's safe while law enforcement investigates. If you have a biological link, Miss Parker, that can change things, but we still have a process." "I understand process," I said. "I run a diner. If the eggs aren't cracked in the right order, the breakfast rush burns. Test me. Talk to my pastor. Talk to my postman. Talk to the county clerk who's watched me pay taxes for 40 years. I'll talk to everyone," she said, and something in her tone sounded like she believed in boring people who show up every day. Abby's boyfriend never liked me. That's a simple sentence that holds multitudes. Cole Benton had eyes that used to be soft until they decided hardness felt like power. He'd worked odd jobs for Brent Halley, the man behind the tree crew whose sticker had glinted on that rear window. Cole called my rules old lady curfews and said Abby needed room to breathe. He told her a full-time job at the diner kept her small, that family smothers under the flag of care. He turned off her phone when I called during dinner because he didn't want their time invaded. He told her our house needed new boundaries. Control, 1 inch at a time, looks like "let me help," until suddenly you can't remember the last time you made a choice without paying for it. Lainey wasn't the nod and leave type. ATM footage put Cole and Brent together near Gable Bridge the week Abby vanished. Bank records, bruised by overdrafts, showed cash withdrawals lining up with dates Brent's company got paid for municipal work, like someone skimming when nobody was looking. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a line of smoke that led to the back door. On day 4, Cheryl came with a paper bag holding personal effects returned from NICU intake. "This was wadded in the flannel," she said, sliding a folded church bulletin across the table. "Cedar Cross Baptist, Sunday, 9:30 a.m., with a list of birthdays and casserole schedules. Someone had scribbled in the margin, LD, RB, midnight, Red Bridge. "RB?" I asked. "Red Bridge," Cheryl said softly. "Locals call Gable Bridge that." Lainey tapped LD with her pen. "Little," I said, "Little Deacon." Brent's nickname among tired men who joked when they were most afraid. He hovered around church money without wearing a tie. He liked to bless decisions after he'd made them. At sunset on day 5, my phone rang with no caller ID. I hit speaker without thinking. Cheryl, charting at the nurse's station, froze, then slid her eyes toward the record button on her workstation. Her finger pressed. "Joan," the voice said, gritty, nicotine sanded. "Cole, you found my kid." I said, "You mean the child you dumped in a cooler?" "Don't get righteous," he sneered. "You always wanted to take what's mine. Listen up. Bring the boy and 50 grand to Fairfield Livestock Barn. Midnight, south doors. No cops. You get your happy ending. I get out." "Where's Abby?" The way her name left me sounded like it had edges. "Where is my daughter?" A beat of silence. Then she should have listened. The line died. The room remained, cruel in its ordinary. I forwarded the audio to Lainey with hands that finally stopped shaking. Not because I wasn't afraid, because fear had somewhere to go. "We set the trap," Lainey said when she called back. "You bring nothing but your courage. Baby stays with Cheryl. We'll be on the rafters and at the south door. And Joan, Cole escalates when he feels control slipping. We do not let him call the play." The livestock barn at midnight smells like alfalfa ghosts and coal dust. The auction ring sits in the middle, like an arena where people have taught themselves to talk fast and make numbers feel normal. Lainey's team moved like shadows who knew where all the splinters lived. A deputy perched on the catwalk above with a line of sight clean enough to read a palm. I walked in with a broom from the diner because you can take a woman out of her place of work, but you can't take her sense for the tools that fit her hands. The mic Lainey had clipped near my collarbone sat like a pin I had earned by outliving all of this. Cole stepped from behind a pillar with his hoodie up and his jaw ticking like a clock with a cracked face. Brent slid out a second later, bigger, calm, the way dangerous men are when they believe the room belongs to them. "Where's the money?" Brent asked, voice smooth enough to sell a swing set that would rust by spring.
"I didn't bring it," I said. "I brought questions." Cole laughed without humor. "Still the diner, Mom." "Where is Abby?" I asked. "Where is my girl?" "Gone," Brent said. "People go missing all the time, wander off, start over." "Abby doesn't wander," I said. "She roots. She leaves lists on my fridge and brings home dogs nobody asked for. She calls me when she burns toast. Where is she?" Cole's face flickered like a TV losing signal. Brent's hand shot out and squeezed his shoulder. The flicker died. Control moved in the air the way scent does. Unseen. Undeniable. "You dumped a newborn in a river," I said. "You picked the bridge you knew. You padded the cooler with a church bulletin. You sent a boy to do a man's job and stood on the bridge to make sure he didn't mess it up." "You don't know anything," Brent said, but the tendon in his neck jumped. "What did Abby have that you wanted? Money? Land?" Cole blurted before Brent could stop him. "It was the trust." Brent's eyes sliced toward him. Too late. "What trust?" I said, though part of me had already guessed. "Her granddad left 5 acres behind Millie's to her children. If she didn't have any, it reverts to the church. And the town wants to rezone. Parking lot makes a lot of good people happy." Brent let the smile creep. "A man can facilitate a project and be blessed by it. That's not a sin. Controlling a woman's body is," I said, and my voice surprised me again. "You mentioned juries." Laney's voice thundered from everywhere and nowhere as lights slammed awake. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Brent went for his pocket. The deputy on the catwalk dropped like a hawk and took the angle. Cole bolted for the south doors. I stepped aside and stuck my broom out. He tripped, went down hard, and cuffs clicked before he found a useful swear. Brent froze, palms up, calculating exits that didn't exist. "You got nothing recorded," he said, trying one last door. Laney stepped into the light, held up her phone and hit play. My voice, Cole's demands, Brent calling Abby a troubled girl. The sound filled the barn with our worst meanings. "Everything," Laney said. "We have everything." Brent dropped his eyes for the first time that night, a man who'd found the end of the board he'd been walking his whole life and discovered he couldn't jump. Abby wasn't coming home. They found her the next day in a stand of windbreak trees along a field Brent managed for the church, a shallow grave and a carelessness that said he believed the world would cover his mistakes. The coroner said postpartum hemorrhage complicated by no medical care. I held the edge of the stainless table and learned that rage is a clean fire and grief is a slow flood, and you can live in both a long time. The district attorney didn't flinch. Felony murder and attempted murder for the infant, conspiracy, kidnapping, abuse of a corpse. Cole took a plea. Brent went to trial in a Navy suit that had more polish than his soul. He tried to swagger. The recordings salted that earth. ATM footage, bank logs, the church bulletin, the locket in evidence, its photograph blown up and passed to the jury. Cheryl testified with a voice that never shook. Laney told the story with the precision of a carpenter. Cole sat gray-faced and said, "He told me she'd be fine," and the room hissed in a way that sounded like women. The jury took 40 minutes. The verdict came back like a door swinging open on new air. Guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel sounded like it had been waiting months for that exact piece of wood. Children's service is a stack of forms that scratches your heart raw on the margins. I sat through every class. Safe sleep, car seats, infant first aid. The home study made me childproof every cabinet and prove my smoke detectors worked at 3 in the afternoon. Cheryl came off shift to help me measure crib rails and fold burp cloths. Laney stopped by with a bag of diapers and tolerated my pot roast with a kindness I didn't expect from a woman who wore steel in her spine. "You sure you want to do this, Joan?" she asked me in my kitchen the night before the hearing, elbows on the formica like a sister. "It's going to be hard. Worth it, but hard."
"I'm 62, I said. "Hard's not new. I have a roof that doesn't leak, a job that forgives me when I'm late, a pastor who will sit in my living room until the crying stops, and neighbors who will shovel my driveway without my asking because they know what grief weighs. I have enough love to fill a river. I can learn diapers again." She nodded. "Then we're done here." The judge in Warren County Courtroom B had a face like wind-carved oak and a voice that warmed as she spoke. "Miss Parker, this is unusual, but not impossible. You have the community around you. You have the child's best interest at heart. And you have shown repeatedly that love shows up." She banged the gavel. "Temporary custody. 6 months later, permanent." I named him Ridge. When I told Mila, she smiled the sort of smile that makes lines around the eyes look like stories. "For the bridge?" she asked. "For what carried him," I said. "For the thing that should have killed him and didn't." The first night I brought Ridge home, I placed his car seat on my kitchen table because I didn't trust my arms to lift him without thinking I might break him. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and the ghost of bacon because a diner manager can't get the scent of breakfast out of her clothes even when she scrubs. He opened his mouth in a silent cry, the preamble to a wail, and then he didn't. His eyes slid toward the kitchen light as if he could mark the bright places in a world he'd only just decided to believe in. The second night, he screamed for 2 hours, and I paced my hallway with him on my shoulder, whispering the names of streets in Mason like a lullaby. Main Street, Mechanic, 2nd. I said, "You are home," into his hair. My neighbors pretended they'd been meaning to bring casseroles over for weeks. Mrs. Drummond from 3 doors down appeared with lasagna at noon and pound cake at 6, and then a pan of cinnamon rolls the next morning, as if grief and joy eat on a schedule. Pastor Green sat on my couch and held my hands and didn't try to tidy God up for me. He said, "I don't know why this happened. I only know what we do now." He took out his pocket calendar and penciled himself in for Tuesday nights of folding laundry with me because he doesn't do well with quiet. Cheryl came on her day off with a bag of burnt cloths and the sort of patience born out of long hallways. "He'll sleep if you stop counting minutes," she said, swaddling him with the confidence of a magician. "Babies can smell panic." "How do you know?" I asked. "They smell like panic most of the time," she said. "It's an aroma you learn to name." At 3 a.m, when the house felt too wide and the clock beat loud, I would whisper to Abby in the room that had been hers. I'd tell her the story of breakfast rushes that ran like symphonies and afternoons when the diner settled into its low hum. I'd tell her about Ridge's smile when gas made mischief of his face and how I wanted to claim it as joy anyway. I'd tell her about the days I was angry with her for trusting a boy who wanted to shrink her world, and then how I forgave her for being 22 in a place where control sometimes dresses up as love. I told Ridge stories too, from the minute he learned how to follow the sound of my voice with his eyes. About the time Abby tried to adopt a 3-legged dog and convinced me for 20 minutes that we could manage vet bills if we skipped cable. About how she once made pancakes for dinner without measuring a single ingredient and they turned out like clouds because she believed they would. About the time she wore her locket to the river and told me she felt brave as long as she could feel the metal warm against her skin. I would not let the world reduce her to a headline or a cautionary tale. She was funny and messy and generous enough to bake cookies and leave them on the steps of the trailer park because she remembered how it felt to be 12 and ashamed of hand-me-downs. Ridge learned to toddle after a Cheerio trail across my linoleum. He learned to say Nana as if the syllables could hold up the sky. He learned to clap at Friday night football when the band marched by and dance at Mason Heritage Days with a paper flag in one fist and a lollipop in the other. On his 5th birthday, we ate sheet cake from Kroger, blue frosting staining his lips, and he blew out 5 candles with the seriousness that made Lainey laugh out loud and made Cheryl cry into a napkin. Pastor Green prayed short because he knows children don't have patience for theology. Cheryl came on her day off in jeans and a ball cap, her hair longer than the day we met. She handed Ridge a toy sheriff's badge and winked at me over his head. "You did good," she said, and the past tense felt like a gift. Sometimes, after closing at Millie's, I walk the long way home past the edge of the 5 acres Abby's granddad left to her children. The town wanted that land for a parking lot. Ridge runs the length of the fence with his arms out like wings, and I think about how miracles live in the boring choices we make because they have to. We fought at zoning meetings instead. We planted a community garden and left a row of tomatoes for anyone who needed them. The city council reversed course, not because of Brent, but in spite of him. The sign by the gate says Abby's plot in hand-painted letters someone made without asking my permission, which is exactly how I like my blessings these days. On chilly November mornings before the sun bothers with my street, I drive to Cedar Cross Cemetery with a thermos cap of coffee and a handful of yellow mums. Ridge carries a truck the color of a bruise and, with great seriousness, tells his mother about the new boy in preschool who thinks blueberries is a funny word. He fingers his locket, the twin of his mother's, smaller, looped on a chain that won't break if a playground decides to be unkind, and he says, "Be brave," because he learned to read that inscription before he learned most other things. Inside the locket, a tiny photograph of Abby asleep under a quilt my mother stitched, and a nurse's hand the size of courage holding a newborn steady in a NICU crib. Sometimes, women slide into my booth at Millie's with secrets in their front pockets. A colleague who manages the pharmacy down at Kroger whispers, "My sister's boyfriend checks her mileage." The librarian says he told her she couldn't come to book club. The cashier at the hardware store says he keeps her debit card. I tell them I make good coffee and better pancakes, and that my number doesn't change. If they need a soft place to plan, we keep a light on. Nobody in this town gives women enough credit for what we can build when we decide to tell the truth to each other. Years after the trial, the letters started coming in ones and twos. Women who left men like Brent because the tape of his voice played in a courtroom where they could hear their own survival through it. Men who were boys once, like Cole, who wrote from barber chairs and machine shops about how control snuck into their knuckles and how they learned, through therapy and not magic, to unclench. People returned locket chains they'd found in drawers with no stories attached and asked if I wanted them for the baby, who became a boy who became a rocket at the park on Saturdays. I kept them in a jar on my dresser, little ovals like coins we minted for the courage we begged for. What leads to a riverbank and what leads away from it feels like a math problem, and it isn't. It's mornings you call your daughter back even when you're angry. It's nights you refuse to make a girl small because a man says you should. It's staff meetings at a diner where the line cook avoids eggshells because he's learning to hear how they crack. It's a nurse who puts her hand on your wrist and stays there long enough to teach your body that staying is a word. I don't know what Ridge will remember about the winter he learned to pronounce emerald and thought it could be a dinosaur. I don't know whether he'll play soccer or forget his cleats on the porch 37 times. I do know he asked me once at bedtime, "Is Mommy sad in heaven that she's not here?" And I told him the truest thing I could. I think she is both sad and glad. Sad because she loved you. Glad because you are safe. People can hold two truths at once, like hands. He put his palm in mine then, small and warm, the exact size of a promise, and said, "We hold them together every day," I said. On the anniversary of the bridge, I bring 2 rolls to the river instead of 1. The ducks have learned my walk and debate my arrival like gossiping old men. Frost makes lace where the rails meet rust. If you looked at it just right, the cold seems like it's building something, delicate and complicated and stubborn. I let myself imagine the cooler again only long enough to remember the sound that followed, the thin cry that cut through the thought that nothing could be saved. Control kills, intervenes. If there is a moral to be found there, I carry it with me, like a locket that warms to skin. If there is a reason, it isn't good enough, but reason isn't what pulls people from water. A week after Ridge turned 6, he lost one of his front teeth at the diner. We have a jar by the register labeled tooth tips, where customers have been known to drop quarters and notes that say things like, "Buy a book." He held the tooth in a napkin like a diamond and asked if the tooth fairy paid extra for bravery teeth. I said, "She should." He decided to write her a note explaining the exchange rate for love and fear. He spelled courage with a K and crossed it out and made it into a C with the kind of pride that announces itself like parade drums. When he fell asleep, locket against his chest, I cried without making a sound and asked no one in particular for another decade, and then another, and then however many extra you can steal at the market when life looks the other way. When women hear our story at the counter, they reach for their wallets and say, "You're incredible." I shake my head. "I'm ordinary," I say. "I make pancakes. I did what women do." They don't always believe me. That's okay. The hero is Abby, who changed her mind about what a man could demand. The miracle is Ridge, who breathed hard enough to stay. Me? I'm the bridge between them. Red painted, frost slick, loud enough to rattle when a truck rolls across, stubborn enough not to fall when the river decides to test every bolt. The last time Lainey stopped in before she transferred to a different unit, she slid into the corner booth and ordered black coffee and a slice of lemon pie. She ate slowly, like the sugar could stitch seams. She looked out the window at the parking lot that almost wasn't and said, "You know what I like most about this town, Joe?" "What?" "We don't pretend bad things don't happen here. We tell the truth about them, and then we still show up with casseroles. It's not enough. It's not nothing." At the end of a long shift, when the smell of bacon lives in my hair and my feet have opinions, I walk home under a sky that finally remembers stars. I pass the community garden and the fence where someone hung a sign with Abby's name, and I check the latch because habits are also prayers. Ridge's nightlight glows through his curtain like an ember that refuses to worry about wind. In the living room, the clock ticks, unapologetic. In the kitchen, the broom leans against the wall. Men laugh sometimes about women and their brooms. They don't understand the holiness of a tool you can trust in your hand. I used that broom once to trip a man running from his own choices. It wasn't a weapon. It was a reminder. This is my house. These are my people. You don't get to hurt them and call it love. Before I sleep, I wear my locket for a minute and press it warm against my sternum. Inside, a photograph of Abby that makes her look like she's about to tell me a joke, and one of Ridge in a NICU cap with Cheryl's hand in the frame. It's heavy, which is right. Courage should have weight. If it didn't, anyone could carry it without noticing, and we'd learn nothing. On a morning when the ducks are opinionated and the frost pretends to be delicate and the river practices how to live under something that looks like it could stop it but won't, I breathe and I listen. Some sounds will never leave you. Some you will always be grateful you heard. I hear Ridge behind me, breathless from running, his small boots punching the dirt like exclamation points. "Nana," he says, half laughing, half serious, cheeks pinked by the cold, eyes bright enough to argue with the day. "I can throw really far now. Watch." He winds up, He throws. His marshmallow lands a glorious 2 feet from his shoes. He screams with triumph like he's just pitched the first perfect game in Ohio history. I say, "You're a champion." And I mean it exactly as much as it sounds like I do. He takes my hand, fingers cold and insistent, and pulls me toward home. We walk past the diner where the coffee's already brewing for tomorrow, and the garden Abby will always own, and the fence that keeps the tomatoes honest. The sky above Mason learns its color back, slow as a person who forgives. I say, "Be brave," to the morning, to the river, to the girl I couldn't save and the boy I did, to the woman I was before and the woman I am now. I say to the part of me that still flinches when trucks idle too long at a red light. I say to the part that has learned how to laugh again out loud in the cereal aisle, to wave at neighbors, to dance to the radio while the pasta overboils. We are ordinary here. We are stubborn here. We are, against the better advice of despair, still here. And sometimes, in the exact slant of light where the bridge catches morning and refuses to let it pass untarnished, that's enough. Be brave.